But instead of helping the poor and needy, the talk has mainly concerned Pride Month, climate change, and transgenderism. We already know many churches celebrate Pride Month, but Bristol Cathedral has now been hosting Extinction Rebellion at a multi/non-faith ceremony. Let's take a look. Meanwhile, the Church of England has appointed its first transgender archdeacon in the shape of the Reverend Canon Nick Mann, who has been appointed Archdeacon of Bolton and Salford. Mann is now the most senior trans member of the clergy, which all leads to this week's duel. Joining me now are my duelists, my sidekick Emma Webb and my nemesis, co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Aaron, I know you said you don't like to dump on other denominations, but has the Church of England gone woke?
Has it gone woke? I thought we were just chatting off air while we were watching that video a moment ago, and I said, this is very retro. This is like 14th century medieval church. You know, Savonarola, he was a demagogue in Florence, and, you know, he was saying it's the end of the world and whatnot. Look, we probably have very different views on climate change. I think it's a hugely salient, important political issue. However, what I would say is the role of the church, the role of religion is about moral instruction. And we have never had a bigger vacuum for moral instruction, how to live a life of meaning and principle and purpose, particularly for young men. And that gap is there, and it's getting worse. And people admonish, quite rightly, I think, individuals like Andrew Tate. But the point is, people like that are filling the vacuum and the gap that the big historic institutions of civil society are meant to be, you know, doing themselves. So I think it's good the church acknowledges the reality of climate change.
Does this fill that gap?
I just don't think it's their role. I don't think anybody particularly cares if the church says, yeah, we're going to have, you know, atmospheric concentrations of CO2 mean that we'll have rising sea levels, blah, blah, blah. They care if scientists say it. They care if the next door neighbour says it. But, you know, some church down the road, probably not.
OK. Emma Webb, I don't recognise that as my faith. I don't know what religion that was, but it wasn't Christianity.
Well, I think this is the problem. It's not that the church is woke, it's that the church is no longer a church. It's no longer Christian. It's been completely infested with ideas that are either extraneous to Christianity or actively opposed. And so you mentioned this trans archdeacon. Now, for me, the issue here isn't that this person is trans. The issue is that some of the writings of this person, as has been pointed out by many people on Twitter today, are so blasphemous. They are so contrary to and disrespectful, I think, in many ways. And now, I don't think that somebody shouldn't be able to hold opinions that are blasphemous. That's not what I'm saying, but I am saying that this is indicative of the fact that the Church of England, never mind having sort of lost contact with its doctrine, its traditional Christian roots, has gone so far to basically becoming a non-Christian organisation that these sorts of things don't really even matter anymore. They don't really even shock. And I think that you see this footage of this sort of weird pagan ceremony taking place in a church, and you think, well, it's not that long since there was a putt-putt course and a helter-skelter in one of the cathedrals. And so what do you do? I mean, someone like me, and you know this very well, Calvin, because as soon as I saw this, I said this to you, that I'm thinking, can I be in the Church of England anymore? I don't know if I can be, because I don't think that they're really... It doesn't matter whether or not they're standing up for what is true or the gospel. I just don't think they're standing up for anything. I don't know if they even know who they are anymore.
I would say they are standing up for things, but not the gospel.
They just identify as Christian.
Well, indeed. I left over the critical race theory stuff, but the transgender stuff and the climate stuff is becoming bigger than ever. That transgender archdeacon does make a difference because there's no such thing as trans in the church. You quite rightly mentioned that he's publishing some weird stuff. Here's one of his prayers. Holy God, chuckling wise woman, first blasphemy straight there, tender and strange, we bless you. Bless us, trouble us, bewitch us into delight with your love, mercy and grace. Christ our sister, unite us in your holy bleeding, as you took spit and dust for healing, take our hands, cracked and huge as washerwoman's for God's work, take our sacred bodies for the healing of the world. It goes on. I can't even read it to the end because it's just so blasphemous that it upsets me. This person's been promoted to an archdeacon. I know you're not in this denomination, but come on, even you can see that is heresy that we're seeing right there.
The climate stuff is more interesting to me.
Deflection.
No, I'll tell you why. The climate stuff is interesting to me. No, because St. Francis, right, who the Pope is named after, he was the patron saint of, effectively being at one with nature, a great respect for animals. As the hymn goes, I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners are familiar with it. All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, the Lord God made them all. Now,
good assembly hymn.
Oh, fantastic. One of the best. You belt it out, don't you?
Banger, absolutely.
Banger. But here's the thing. I don't see why an appreciation for God's creation and nature and the world and all creatures and respect for all life is at odds with a belief in climate change and, as an appendage to that, a collapse in biodiversity. We're losing plenty of species, a loss of natural habitat, etc., etc. I think St. Francis would find that troubling. And, he's one of the quintessential saints in the Catholic Church.
Let me push back on that and pose that as a question to you then, because the issue that I have with that weird red vested cult that I saw there, and they did have vestments, they had liturgy, they had hymns, I would say that's a cult. The issue I had with that is because they're not worshipping the Creator, they're worshipping his creation, and that's what makes it a Gnostic heresy.
Interesting point.
It is Gnosticism.
It's broadly correct. Yeah. Conceptually, I think that's probably right.
I was hoping you'd disagree. Thank you. Go on, Emma.
No, I think it's Gnosticism, not just on the climate change stuff, but on all of it. This is what I mean when I say that I think these extraneous, non-Christian beliefs are becoming dominant within the church. And you experienced this yourself, Calvin, because you were basically pushed out by it. But I think that when you and Aaron, I would say that I would identify as a Christian conservative environmentalist. I believe then, of course, that you should be a good custodian of the planet, and that's what the Bible teaches. Yeah. But that is not this environmentalist, climate catastrophist cult that we're seeing. And I think that the problem here, and going back to some of the things that have been written by this archdeacon, suggesting that Mary regretted having given birth to Christ, that the angel didn't want Mary to say yes to being impregnated with Christ. These are things that are so off the rails. They are so far off the rails that my only observation is simply that the Church of England is having such a profound identity crisis if it thinks that these things fall within the sphere of the Church of England and its doctrine and the gospel teachings, that it's so far off the rails that it's sort of ceased to be itself. Yeah. And that's not to say that people can't hold heretical views or write things that are blasphemous.
The teachers can't, no.
But it's just that the Church of England itself doesn't know what it is anymore.
OK, Aaron, I'm going to put this to you, because this Nick Mann, this archdeacon, there's two issues that I have here. One is the blasphemy, the prayers, the writings, and in some of them he has admitted that he has a mental disorder of gender dysphoria, so he has admitted that. The second issue I have with that is that the Church has affirmed his mental illness rather than supporting him and encouraged him in a stance that I would say is antithetical to the Scriptures. I would say that the Scriptures teach us that God made us in his image, God made us male and female, and there is no such thing as trans. And actually, we are our bodies and our souls, and the idea that we are in the wrong body is an affront to God. The idea we can change into a different sex, change from something that he created us, will be an affront to God. Where do you put that? How does the Church reconcile that? How does the Church say, well, actually, we think this is a good thing and we're going to promote it, even if the Scriptures are against it?
Well, I personally don't believe that. I don't personally agree with that. And what I would say is, obviously, any Christian, there's a familiar debate to anyone, which is you're accountable for your actions and you have to repent for your actions, and somebody else's business is their problem. It's between them and God. With relation to the substantial question there, again, this is a question of orthodoxy for the Church of England. I think it goes back to something we've said before on the show, which is the Church of England is a church attached to a state, and it's attached to a state which is a liberal democracy. What we've seen over the last 100, 150 years is a transition to where we say the individual is more and more and more important. Individualism has upsides, it has downsides. We don't need to debate those today. But I think what you're saying, particularly with the church in the West, or just broadly faith, and what's interesting is Islam completely rejects this, right? Is this praise and attention and veneration of the individual, which is often at odds with millennia-old principles and values that we've inherited from various faiths. And it does feel like Western Christianity is moving in a different direction to other faiths like Islam. And again, that's just an observation.
No, it's a good one. And I think that Aaron's spot on there, and that we are making gods of ourselves. And this whole trans thing, this whole having an archdeacon that is trans, is, again, it's all about self-identity. It's all about the individual being the god, rather than redirecting our gaze towards someone greater, someone bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this sense for a very long time, and I've church hopped all over the country, and sometimes you look around yourself and you think, I don't know whether even the clergy believes in the gospel. I don't know whether they really believe in this. And, Orwell even writes about this going back well into the 1920s. It's obviously been a phenomenon that's been taking place for a very long time. But I think fundamentally the Church of England, because it is the state church perhaps, and I would never make an argument for disestablishment because I know we disagree on that, but I think that the church feels that it needs to become like society in order to justify its own existence.
That's right.
And the problem is that if it does that, it ceases to be the church, because the whole purpose of a church, of a religious belief, of this the most basic Christian idea of preaching the gospel, you cannot do that whilst becoming like society. And if they think that's going to get more bums on pews, I think we've seen, and Justin Welby actually took some personal responsibility for this the other day, I think we've seen that it doesn't get bums on pews, it's the opposite. It's chasing people away from the church, because what they want when they go to church is sincerely held convictions and beliefs. And that's not to say that churches are dogmatic and not welcoming, but they want sincerity and authenticity. And what they get from the Church of England is this weird pagan wellness cult that they've basically become.